Hey guys, Lee here from the Appalicious Teacher. Super excited to be talking to you guys tonight about close reading. Definitely one of my favorite topics to discuss. For those of you that are just tuning in, tonight we are talking about close reading for success, 5 tips on how to select a text that you can use for a close reading routine in your classroom. So tonight I'm going to be kind of going over what close reading is, and then we're going to jump into those 5 tips on how you can actually select your own quality text to use for close reading. And then at the end, we're going to be doing just a little giveaway. Actually, who am I kidding? We're going to be doing a huge giveaway where I'm going to be actually giving one person who is chatting with us tonight a whole year's worth of close reading lesson plans so that they won't have to worry about writing their lesson plans for the rest of the year when it comes to close reading. So I'm pretty excited about that. This is a live video, so please feel free to comment and share down in the comment box below. There's also a blog post that's related to this, so if you have questions or maybe you missed something, right up above me here are some links to a blog post about the tips I'm going to share, as well as a link to the lesson plans that I'm giving away at the end of this post. So let's go ahead and get started with close reading. Hi, Christina. Thank you for joining me. Let's go ahead and get started and talk about close reading and what it is and where its place is in your classroom. So when we think close reading, we think upper grades. We think we're looking at deep literature, we're looking at maybe just passages that we purchased from TPT or maybe we found online, and we're thinking we're going to be looking at those and rereading that over and over and over again, and we're thinking it's very deep and complex, and it's not necessarily something that we do in the primary classroom. But I could not disagree more with all those descriptions of what close reading is, because to me, close reading is unlocking the magic of books in a way that speaks to students and is engaging to students. I still remember the first time that I started doing close read with my second graders, and how really just their eyes kind of lit up because they started to understand, hey, this author wrote this book, but look, there's also these pictures that go with this book, and look how they use these words for this book. And they really were able to kind of appreciate that book so much more because we actually took the time to comb through that text and really look at the little inner secret. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties, of course. Anyway, but you know, as a reader, I really was able to open their eyes to the wonder that is books, and from then on, my students kind of became like savages. They wanted to just look at books, read books, talk about books, and really they fell in love with reading, which is exactly what we want as teachers. You know, where does close reading fit into your classroom? I think the biggest mistake that teachers think that they make when they start close reading is they think they have to do it every single week. Every single week that they, hi Jennifer from Florida. Oh, Florida too, yay, Florida teachers. The biggest mistake that teachers make when they start implementing close read is they think they have to do it week after week after week. And let's be honest, nothing will get more boring if you continuously do the same thing week after week after week. Now, yes, there's something we said about routine, and we definitely want to keep a routine with our students, but if we're doing that same exact routine over and over again, our students are going to tune out. So when I think of close reading, I think of it being done maybe once or twice a month with a book that you're really excited about. So you'll notice in my close reading all year lesson plans up there that really there's only one book a month, because that's really all you need to do for a close reading each month. Maybe 1 to 2 books, and in between that I suggest you do thematic units or an author study, or maybe you're diving into doing some into using some content area literature in your reading block. So you're going to want to disperse that close reading routine among other types of learning to kind of keep it fresh and new in your classroom, because it can get daunting to reread a text over and over again. Hey guys, thank you for joining. And then a lot of teachers ask, where in my day should I be doing close reading? Is it something that I do at my guided reading table? Is it something I'm supposed to be doing during my content area, like science and social studies? And I'm going to say yes to all of those, but my favorite place to do close reading is in the whole group setting. So when you do your core whole group reading instruction, that's your chance to really get your students hooked on books through close reading by implementing the strategies that go with close reading, which I will be talking about later on during the summer. So if you want to learn more about those, make sure you join me every Wednesday. Hi, first year teacher from, I don't know where you're from, Allison, but hey, it's so good that you're joining me. Thanks, Allison. Anyway, so we want to use a close reading routine in our classroom. I prefer it to be used in whole group. I do that because I feel like parallel teaching can be very inefficient, and I know that I want all my students to fall in love with the book that I am sharing with them, and I don't necessarily need to do that with small groups. Now, that's not to say you couldn't do close reading in small groups. You can, and I've seen it done very well. But just remember, hey, Kelly, so glad you came. Just remember, when you are doing close reading in small groups, you really need to make sure you're choosing texts that are on their level. This is your chance to really differentiate. Your lowest group of students should not be reading in small group with you the same book that your highest group of students are. So it's a little more work for you to actually find these really juicy texts that we're going to be talking about tonight for your small groups, but you could totally do this with small groups. And also, this is where I see a lot of teachers use close reading, what's it called? Close reading packs that are like those little primer passages. You could do those during small group instruction as well. It's not my favorite way to do close reading, and I think it's a really fast way to kind of dissolve the students' love for learning, but I think it's a great way, if you're not doing it all the time, it's a great way to kind of build some of that fluency and stuff. All right, so why books, okay? A lot of teachers think that to do a close read, it has to be short, and when we look at literature written about close reading, they do talk about the brevity of text when you're close reading. And the reason they talk about the brevity or the shortness of the text is because they don't want you to be reading a 500-page novel 2 or 3 times. That doesn't make sense. Your students are going to wear thin in that time. They're not going to be able to they're not going to be able to stay with you. I mean, come on, how many times can you read a 500-page novel, especially back to back? So you need to make sure that you're selecting texts that are shorter, or if you are going to do a close read on a novel, which you totally could, I think Wonder, the book Wonder that's coming out with the movie, would be a great book if you're in 3rd through 5th grade to do a close read on, because there's so many many messages in there about humanity, about us as people, about kindness. It's a great book, so many great lessons there. But when you do a close read there, you're almost dissecting that book and taking it chapter by chapter and looking at little miniature pieces and maybe revisiting moments in the book instead of actually rereading that book over and over and over again. So for tonight's purpose, we're going to be talking about close reading using picture books, because I find that to be the most kid-friendly for the primary classroom. Kids tend to kind of adhere to that. And so let's talk about what makes a really good book for close reading. So the first thing we want to look at when we're going to be, when we're looking at selecting a book for a close reading routine, we're there, we're ready, we're thinking, okay, I really want to do this, I want to implement this in my classroom. What kind of book should I look for? The first thing we want to look for is a book that is appropriate for your students, okay? And what I mean by appropriate is in 2 different ways. It's level appropriate, but also content appropriate. Now, let's kind of jump back to that level appropriate. As a 2nd grade teacher, I am fine with reading books that might be meant for a first grade reader, all the way up to some maybe books that might be meant for a third or fourth grade reader, especially if we're reading it out loud. But what I mean about appropriateness is if we're doing Chicka Chicka Boom Boom in kindergarten, that's not necessarily an appropriate book to do a close read on in, say, fourth or fifth grade. Yeah, it's a great book. Your kids are going to like it, but it's not necessarily appropriate for your grade, your age level. Another great example is Frankenstein, which I love, and I think it's great for second and third grade, but this isn't necessarily a book that I would spend a lot of time on as a fourth grade teacher to do a close read. Because yes, there's some great things that happen in this book that really get kids thinking about author's craft. It's a little bit below where maybe a fourth grade student could be and where they can handle. So when we think about appropriateness, we really want to think about that level of reading that's required, and then also the content. Okay, and this is where we think about themes that are happening in stories. Some great books that are for older kids, like Among the Hidden and Wonder, are not necessarily books that I'm wanting to do a close read on with my second graders or even my early third graders, because it's going to be exploring themes or ideas that I'm not sure my students are mature enough to handle. And if they are mature enough to handle, will they even understand the severity or the importance of that to actually kind of get in with, let that lesson sort of sink in, which is why we do close reading, is to kind of show them that authors are trying to teach us lessons. They're trying to show us something or illustrate something in our brain. Excuse me. And so when you're choosing a text that's not appropriate for your students, you're losing out on an opportunity for them to learn that lesson or see that magic that author was trying to make for them, because they either A, it was too hard for them, they didn't grasp it, went over their head, or B, they weren't emotionally mature enough for that book, or they were too mature for that book and it just was boring and they tuned it out. Okay, so first tip is we want to look for books that are appropriate for our grade level. Second tip is we want to look for books that exhibit exemplary vocabulary. Okay, and I'm talking the kind of vocabulary that you would kind of see in like that tier 2 range, more than just the same kind of similar vocabulary we'd see in every book, but books that have what I like to call delicious words. Now, they don't need to be covered in delicious words, like Fancy Nancy is like covered in delicious words, and it almost becomes too much. We want books that just have, excuse me, I'm dying over here. Did everybody else bring drinks? I'm hoping other people brought drinks. I mean, I brought water, but I'm hoping you sat down with a drink tonight. Anyway, vocabulary. We don't want books like Fancy Nancy where it's like covered in all these really fancy kind of fanatical and whimsical words. We want words that make students think, give them opportunity to research if they don't know what that word means, the definition of the word, or how it's being used in that context. Oh, Kara, I see your question over there. Does anyone have a master list of books? I actually, if you subscribe to my close reading newsletter, in there is a section where I talk about a master list of books that are appropriate for close reading, and the Common Core exemplar texts, I think in Appendix C, is a great list to start from, because those are all books that Common Core is kind of designated as being appropriate for a grade level bandwidth that also explores deeper themes and deeper meanings. But like I said, if you're part of my close reading newsletter, you'll get a link to that. Anyway, so back to vocabulary. We want to give our students a chance to learn new words. We want to give them a chance to explore vocabulary strategies, like words that have, prefixes and suffixes, or words that are only content specific. We really want to look at a book and say, does this book give my students growth room to expand their vocabulary? Does it have compound words? Is it using words in different ways that we might not usually see? Are they using shades of meaning? They're not just saying the person is angry, they're saying they're livid. I mean, those are those juicy kind of words we really want to look for when we're looking at a close reading text. So that was our second tip. So number 1, appropriate. Number 2, vocabulary. Number 3 is the illustrations or the text features. Now, when I talk about illustrations, I'm talking about quality illustrations. And anytime that you can get a catacult winner, like Snowflake Bentley was a catacult winner, anytime you can pick up that almost immediately makes it a great book for a close read, because even if the story may not have a lot of, intrigue or a lot of depth to it, like Snowflake Bentley isn't necessarily a life-changing story where you read it and you're just like, oh my gosh, my whole view of the world has changed. It has such a great way of storytelling with how the illustrator made their illustrations to help tell the story, but then also these little tidbits of nonfiction information on the sides. And so it really opens up conversation for students on why the author included these little things, and we can kind of explore a little bit more about that author's purpose for writing this very seemingly fictional but not fictional. It is nonfiction book. So we definitely want to look at illustrations. We want to make sure that we're looking for quality text features, like in this text here, From Seed to Plant by Gail Gibbons, which is a great book to do for springtime close read. Hey, LaToya, thanks for joining us. There are really some great text features in here, some great examples of diagrams. Here you can see they use this diagram. And I think there was an example of, yeah, unless we've got this one as well. Whoops, this one and this one. These are great examples of text features, and that really supports what the author is trying to explain in the text, and it leads to great conversation about that. Okay, so first we're looking at appropriateness for books. Second, we're looking at vocabulary that's found in the books. And then third, we're looking at the illustrations and the text features. And when we're looking at those illustrations, of course, we want to see, are they interesting? We want to see, are the illustrations unique or special? Are they helping to tell the story, sometimes even better than the actual text, like in First Aid Jitters, which if you don't have this book, run to Amazon Prime right now, order it. Read it like 2 or 3 times and then just hug it, because it will be forever your favorite book to use at the beginning of the year. And I see lots of hearts floating by, so I feel like everybody agrees with me that this book is great. But this book is an amazing example of how illustrations actually tell you more than what the author is telling you from the text. All right, so that was third, was illustrations and text features. The fourth thing that we should be looking at, oh, I see more hearts because you guys all love that book, you do. The fourth thing we should be looking at when selecting text for a close reading routine is the book relatable? And if it isn't necessarily something your students can relate to, is it part of their interest or something that they've discussed, or even something that might push them out of their comfort zone in their thinking? Okay, we want to select texts that our students can make a connection with personally, or are things that they have a natural interest in. And so for Frankenstein, which I love using around October, it's not necessarily a very deep book. It's not earth-shattering. But the character, our main protagonist in this text, the little boy, is so relatable to your students. What student hasn't been cranky? What student isn't upset? And even just looking at the illustration, we can see, look, he was eating his ice cream cone, it fell on the floor, and look at his mouth here. We can just see right away that he is so upset about this event that has happened. And this book became so relatable, and so many of my students were able to make connections to this character that the book kind of almost took on a life to them, and it became magical to them because it was almost like speaking for them on how they feel. And anytime that a student can make a personal connection to a book, it's something very powerful. Another thing to keep in mind is interest. If your students love baseball, love sports, mine always seem to love animals. If your students love animals, work to find quality texts that kind of fit into those interest levels, because your students will automatically already have an engagement piece and a background piece there, and they're going to want to learn more from that book, especially nonfiction texts. like I had mentioned before, sometimes you want to look for books if they can't really relate to them and that's not really their high interest. We want to look for books that are going to push their comfort zone of thinking. And those kind of books are going to be books like Stone Fox, especially for 3rd and 4th grade, where, you know, there's this boy and his grandfather's sick, and there's a lot of things that students, they can't relate to that. Maybe, you know, they don't necessarily have to survive and make money for their family, you know, to make sure there's, you know, food on the table, but it definitely pushes their thinking as to what a story could have. Another one, again, Wonder, using that story as a way to kind of push your students beyond their level of thinking or their scope, and to really get that conversation going about, you know, themes of humanity and you know, of character, you know, and how characters change from the beginning of the story to the end. So anytime that you can take a book that really kind of pushes your students thinking out of the box, it's a great book to use for close reading. Okay, so let's recap really quick for those of you that have joined, because I just saw that a few more people have joined. We are discussing 5 tips for selecting a text for close read. Tip number 1 was to look, for books that are appropriate for our students. Tip number 2 was to look for books that have quality vocabulary. Tip number 3 is to look for books that have exemplary illustrations or text features. And so, like I had talked about, those Catacult winners are always great books to pull for close reads. And then tip number 4, which I just finished talking about, was finding a book that's relatable or high interest, or finding a genre that's not a genre, a plethora of books that are relatable or high interest for your students. So tip number 5 this evening is one that I think as teachers we discount ourselves a little bit, but if all else fails when it comes to selecting text for a close read, choose a book that speaks to you and start there. It will be more authentic coming from you because you have a personal connection already with that book, that your students will become so interested in that book because you love it so much, and because you love it so much, they're going to love it too. There is a book that I loved for years, which was Somebody Loves You, Mr. Hatch, and I had never really done a close read on it. I would just kind of pull it up for Valentine's Day each year and read it and put it away. But I realized I really loved this book, and as I actually sat there and thought about what it is I loved so much about this book, I was able to realize this is a perfect candidate for close reading text because it explores so many things, and because I love it so much, my students loved it too, and it became easy for me to sort of kind of delve in and you know, kind of pick apart this book, dissect this book to find what I loved so much about it. I realized I loved the illustrations and how, you know, the author had taken the illustrations from very dull at the beginning of the book and made them bright and colorful in the middle of the book. I mean, that to me, I loved that the author did that, and it made it easy for me to share that with students. I love that the author changes his character throughout the story. You know, at the beginning of the story, Mr. Hatch is a very lonely old man, but at the end of the story, he has changed in a significant way, and it's very heartwarming and touching to me, and so I was able to kind of communicate that with students. So tip number 5, if all else fails, look to books that you love and then dissect why you love that and use that as a launching point for a lesson. Oh, Christina says she's familiar with all the books I've mentioned. That's because they're great books. Close reading is about reading great books. It's not about reading just plain old passages or, you know, things that you just quick little articles that you find online. It's about reading and enjoying real books. Most of the texts I shared tonight were fiction, but you could totally do close reading in a nonfiction setting. Scholastic News is an amazing resource that is great for close reads, and if you have a subscription to the Scholastic News, please look at that and just really think about how you could look at that text over and over again, because usually it's right on level for your students and they're always so high interest. Another great one for, oh yeah, nonfiction was Seeds to Plants. And then also, where is it? Superstorms, which I have as part of my April close reading pack. Superstorms is a great one too. It has great text features. The information that it's given is very accurate but kid friendly, and it's also high interest because kids love learning about extreme weather and lightning and thunder and what causes that and what kind of crazy things can happen. Like, kids love that stuff. Oh, you're welcome, Tanita. Tanita says, thanks for sharing such great tips. You know, I don't know if you guys can tell, but I'm like a little nervous tonight, and I'm like talking a million miles a minute. So I'm trying to like slow down and like recap what I'm saying, just in case you're kind of losing me here. Oh, thank you guys. Thank you. Okay, so those are my 5 tips for selecting a text to use for close reading. If you have questions about books, comments about books, go ahead and post them here. To end my little session tonight, we're going to be doing a little giveaway, which is always my favorite part of any little thing. And so just to recap for those of you who joined us, our giveaway tonight is I'm giving away a close reading pack that has lesson plans for the entire year. So if you're wanting to do close reading in your classroom, but you're not sure where to start, and you're looking for something that is done for you, I've got it, and you're going to get a chance to win it tonight. And so to enter for a chance to win, it's super easy, super easy. All you have to do is comment here with your favorite book. That's it. I'm not going to select a winner tonight, like right this second. I'm going to select a winner tomorrow at 9, and the reason I'm going to do that is because a lot of times with Facebook Live, people can't get on right away, and they miss that opportunity. And I want people to have the opportunity to win this, because I'm excited about giving it away, and I want everybody to have a chance to win. And I would hate it if only, you know, the people that got on to see me live got a chance to win. But yeah, so to enter the giveaway, all you have to do is comment. Do you have multiple copies of each book? Oh, yes. Caitlin, great question. Oh, let me finish what I was saying. Okay, so all you have to do is comment with the book that you love. That's it. That'll enter you as a chance, and I will pick my winner tomorrow. While you're commenting, I'm going to go through and try to answer some questions. And then, of course, pick out, you know, and talk about some of these books that you guys are suggesting. So Caitlin asked, do you have multiple copies of a book, or do you share just one? Now, finding multiple copies of a book can be very challenging, but do not fret and do not be afraid into thinking that you have to have multiple copies of one book to do a close reading lesson, because you do not. You could just have one book and look at that book over and over again together as a class, and use sticky notes as a way for students to interact with the text. Another option I've done is sometimes I'll order maybe 4 of the same book, especially if they're like the dollar deal in Scholastic. I'll order maybe 4 or 5 of that book, and we'll read it in small groups, and I'll have students talk and kind of note the text in their groups. If you have a Basil that you use, look through your Basil and look to see, are there any really like quality books in the Basil? Are there any really great stories or great maybe poems in there? That's a great way, because a lot of times Basils have textbooks for every student in your class, and now you can put that text in front of all of your students. But do not be afraid to not do a close read on a book just because you don't have a whole class set. You do not need a whole class set to do it. Let's see, were there any other questions? The problem is they scroll up at the top. I gotta re-scroll. Thanks. What's a great book for first grade? Teresita asks. A great book for first grade. Well, I guess it depends on what time of year you're thinking. I think anytime that you can pull a book that you love for the grade level that you love is fine. For like back to school time, I love first day jitters, and I think your first graders would like this text too, even though I've read it for second and third grade. I'm trying to think of some others that would be great. Oh, Turk and Runt for Thanksgiving would be a good one too for first grade. although I love it for second and third too. I think what really it boils down to is how are you looking at that text in a way that's appropriate for first graders, and that means really examining the standards and making sure that the book you're selecting aligns with at least 2 standards. You don't need more than 2, but you want at least 2 standards on your grade level. Let me see, were there any other questions? Oh, Kara says she loves You Are Special. Oh, I love that one too. Joy says she's going to be starting the year with Wonder. Just want to make sure if we had any questions that I didn't answer. Okay, let's go back down. Oh, Janice said that one of her favorite books to read is Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Now, you know what, Janice? I love using Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs as part of a study and using Pickles to Pittsburgh to do a compare and contrast of how the author used the same idea and the same framework, story framework, to actually create a second book in that series. So to me, that's such a great one for an author study. Am I back? Okay, sorry about that, guys. That was weird. Okay, so let's see. Angela asks, how often do I do close reading? At the beginning of my video, I had discussed how I do close reading only maybe once or twice a month because we don't want to overkill that routine. We want to kind of disperse it with either an author's study or a thematic unit or you know, some other type of learning routine so that students don't get bored with reading the same books over and over again. Christina mentions that she was guilty of the weekly close reading passages. She said it stressed her out and she doesn't want to do as much next year. Christina, I cannot agree more. I think we as teachers want things, when we come to something new, we're scared of it and we want it to be easy. And passages make close reading easy, don't they? And that's fine if you want to do an intervention group or maybe even just introduce your students to what close reading could be. But I feel like you're doing such a disservice to your students when you give them a passage. When we think about our favorite books, when I think about why I love Somebody Loves Mr. Hatch, or when I think about like how I feel when I read First Aid Jitters, those same types of feelings do not come when I read a passage. They just don't. They're not there. So why do we think that rereading a passage over and over and over again is going to build a love of reading and a love of books for our students when it's really not? It may even like killjoy them. I mean, it may make them hate reading and think that, oh my gosh, reading is so boring. Why does my teacher keep making me do this? You know, we don't want to ruin that for our students. We want them to see the magic that's in books. All right, let's see. Michelle says her favorite book is Wonder. Oh, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Verlaine. I have not read this book, yet I feel like I need to because everybody talks about it. Oh, Harry Potter with your third graders. Joyce, I'm intrigued with this because this to me is like borderlines on that appropriateness. I think the first one is great for third grade, but I know if my teacher read that book with me, I would like read all the rest, and it just gets so dark at the end of that series, and I just wonder, can my third graders handle that? And I mean, sometimes it's a question of more for the parents than it is for the teacher to know what their students can handle, but I'm interested to see how your Harry Potter study goes. Let me see. Oh, using Harry the Dirty Dog. Yeah, I love The Witch of Blackbird Pond. I have not read that one. Read that with fifth grade. I'll have to check that one out. Frindle. Oh, I love Frindle. What a great book that students can relate to. I Need My Monster. That's a great one. Oh, you're finally here. That's a cute one. Someone had asked about first grade books. That would be a great one for first grade. The Tin Forest. Oh, thank you, Deborah, for sharing my video. Thank you. That's what I thought. Wanted to confirm. Okay, I knew that. Do I ever follow up so parents can enjoy the books as well? You know, aren't I such a terrible teacher that I didn't ever send things home for my parents? Maybe it's because I worked at a Title I school where I know parents were not going to necessarily be buying these types of books for their students. But that's not to say that I didn't try really hard to send home quality texts with my students for them to read at home. But no, I didn't actually do very much at home because working at Title I, parent involvement at home is usually minimal, very minimal. And I would just be happy if they signed the planner. That's not an excuse. Do not follow me on that one. Mary mentions that she likes to use passages when teaching comparing texts. And Mary, that's a great way to start, but I do suggest you take it one step further and actually start comparing fables that are of the same type. You know, there's lots of Cinderella fables, there's the Three Little Pig fables, and really look at that because that's where our standards are. And when we look at close reading and where it fits, we really want to make sure that we're like right in on those standards with that. Patricia Polacca books are my favorite too. Thank you, Mr. Falker is a good one. Oh, you got to get the kiddos to bed. Well, thank you, Allison, for joining. Okay, go ahead and keep commenting with your favorite books. I'm going to be back tomorrow night to announce my winner. The winner will receive close reading lesson plans for an entire year. If you have more questions or comments, go ahead and you can comment here, and I'll stay around for a few more minutes to, I will stay around for a few more minutes to comment and answer any questions that you guys might have. But thank you so much for joining me tonight as we talked about close reading and selecting those texts. I will be back next week to continue this close reading conversation as we dive into close reading. To me, is a 5-day routine. And so next week, we're going to be diving into what you can do on day 1 of that 5-day routine. So make sure you tune back in next Wednesday, same time, same place. All right, guys, have a great evening, and I will see you later. Happy summer.